The locker room goes silent, 40 eyes pretending to look anywhere but here. Reeve Caldwell stands 3 feet from me, jaw set, composure visibly working for the first time all season. She has just used a coaching correction to say something she had no right to say, in front of my teammates, in front of the entire training staff, in front of everyone in this room. I look at her. She looks at me. The silence between us is the loudest thing in the building. She is the most controlled person I have ever played for. And she is standing here losing that control 1 careful millimeter at a time. We both know what this means. Tomorrow morning, everything changes. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. The bus back from Sacramento left at 11:15 on a Friday night, which was the least glamorous part of professional basketball. The win was real. A 9-point road win that we had earned by playing better defensive basketball in the fourth quarter than we had played all season, which was the direct result of a halftime adjustment Reeve Caldwell had diagrammed on the whiteboard in 30 seconds flat, and which I had executed correctly on every possession it had mattered. I was good at my job. I want to say that first, because the rest of this is easier to understand if you know that about me. I was a professional. I had been a professional for 4 years, through 2 different organizations and 1 trade, and the particular specific education that professional basketball administers to players who think they already know everything. I was not 22 and impressionable. I was 26 and competent, and Tessa Vila being competent was one of the things I had built my professional identity around. And then there was Reeve. I did not have a category for Reeve Caldwell when I arrived at this organization in October, which was itself an unusual problem. I had played for 8 coaches across 4 years of professional basketball, and I understood coaching types with the fluency that comes from extended exposure: the emotional managers, the tactical obsessives, the player development specialists, the old-school authority builders. I understood how coaches organized their power and how they communicated it, and how they related to the players whose careers existed inside the frameworks they built. Reeve Caldwell was 38 years old. She had played professionally for 9 years before a shoulder injury redirected her, and she had been head coaching at the professional level for 6 years, 4 of them with this organization. She was 5'9" and moved like a former athlete. Economically, precisely, with the kind of controlled physicality that people who have played at a high level carry in their bodies for decades after they stop playing. She wore dark suits to games, always tailored, always in colors that were 1 degree more interesting than they needed to be. Deep charcoal, dark teal, the particular blue-black that looks different depending on the light. She wore her hair clipped short at the back, with slightly more length on top, the color of dark wood, and she had the kind of jaw that I had started noticing the specific angle of approximately 3 weeks into the season, which was information I had declined to examine. She ran film sessions like lectures. She asked questions instead of making statements, and she waited for the answers with complete patience and zero tolerance for vagueness. She corrected technique with the direct, unsoftened clarity of someone who considered it disrespectful to let an error slide for the sake of sparing someone's feelings. She was not warm, not in the way that some coaches are warm. She did not give easy praise or manage emotional climates with performed enthusiasm. She was fair. She was precise. She was the best technical mind I had ever worked under, and I had understood within 6 weeks that the coaching I was receiving was the most consequential of my career. None of that was the problem. The problem was the other thing, the thing that was not coaching. It had started small, the way these things always do. Specific details that, individually, had innocent explanations, and which accumulated over time into something that did not. She remembered that I did not drink the team-issued sports drink before games, that it sat wrong in my stomach, and that I needed a specific electrolyte mix that the training staff kept separately, without my having told her. She had simply ensured that my pre-game table had it, and I had not known how to ask who had directed that. She knew, without my saying, that I worked through blocking drills better when the gym was cold, and the facility temperature on days she ran individual skill work with me was always several degrees lower than on team practice days. She tracked my game minutes against road trip schedules in a way that meant I was never playing heavy minutes the night before a 5-hour travel day, which no coach I had played for had ever thought about. None of it was soft. None of it performed warmth. It was all applied intelligence, and she was that specific about everyone. I knew this because I had asked Priya about it, and Priya had looked at me with the patient assessment of a woman who had been in this league for 11 years and had seen every version of this conversation before. Priya Hollis was 34, a veteran power forward with the kind of broad-shouldered calm that made rookies stop panicking and veterans stop performing. She had been with this organization for 5 years. She knew Reeve the way you know someone you have worked alongside through winning and losing and the complicated everything in between. She's thorough with everyone, Priya had said, when I asked. She knows every player's rhythms because that's the job she decided to do. But she's not identical with everyone. You're right that she's not identical with you. I had been hoping Priya would tell me I was misreading it. Priya had the dignity not to pretend. So I carried it. That was the phrase that had settled into my internal vocabulary for the thing I was doing. Carrying it. Carrying the awareness of Reeve Caldwell the way you carry something heavy that you have decided you are not going to put down on company property. I carried it through October and November and the stretch of December games that nearly broke our rotation, through road trips and film sessions and the specific electric quality of private coaching conversations, where she sat across from me at the film room desk and explained exactly where my off-ball movement was losing the defense, and I tried to absorb the information while simultaneously absorbing the way she said my name. Avila. She said it cleanly. No edges, no affect. Just the word. Nobody said my name like that. The bus was a charter, one of the league's contracted coaches, wide seats, subdued lighting. We left Sacramento at 11:15 with the whole team on board, and the particular post-win energy that is less loud than post-loss processing and more sustained. People were plugged in or stretched out or having the low-register conversations that happen when a team has done something right and knows it and does not need to be loud about it. I took the window seat in the third row on the right side. I had a long habit of sitting toward the front on charter buses. I had bad motion sickness in the back, which I had mentioned to exactly no one, and which somehow Reeve had arranged to know about, because the team's seating chart had placed me in the third row for the entire season without discussion. She took the aisle seat beside me. This was not unusual. Reeve sat near the front on road trips. She sat beside different players at different times. I had cataloged this, not because I was tracking her movements, but because I noticed everything about her, and that was a different problem I was also carrying. She did not take the aisle seat beside me every game. She did not gravitate to my row with any obvious pattern. This was the third time this season she had sat beside me on a charter bus, and I had categorized the first 2 times as coincidence and was beginning to run out of categories. She had a tablet in her lap. She was reviewing something. I did not try to look, which was its own act of discipline. The bus pulled out at 11:18. The cabin lights dimmed to their nighttime setting. Outside the window, Sacramento became the freeway, and the freeway became the dark. I put in one earbud. I had a playlist for long drives. Specific and unhurried. The kind of music that does not demand anything. I was watching the dark outside the window, tracking the light patterns of other cars and the occasional glow of a road sign, and I had not planned to fall asleep. I never planned to fall asleep on buses. I was, if anything, a notoriously poor sleeper in transit, which was one of the things my previous team's training staff had made a project of without success. The win had taken something out of me, the fourth quarter had taken something specific. I had played the last 8 minutes of that game with the particular focused expenditure of a person who knows the last 8 minutes are the 8 minutes that will be watched on film, that will matter, that will tell the story of whether the adjustment worked. And it had worked. And I had played every possession of it correctly, and the correct execution of 8 minutes of playoff intensity basketball on the road at the tail end of November is the specific kind of tired that reaches the bones. My earbud fell out at some point. I did not register it. I registered the warmth first. The specific quality of being close to another person, the way a seat that has been occupied next to you shifts the ambient warmth of your side of the row, and then the solidity, the shoulder. I was not fully asleep when I registered it. I was in the particular in-between state where the body has made its decisions and the mind is several steps behind, still catching up, still deciding whether to object. The shoulder under my cheek was warm and steady, and slightly higher than a pillow. The right height, actually, for the angle of a head resting sideways. There was the faint trace of cedar and something clean underneath it, and the fabric against my face was the fine woven texture of a good jacket. I knew. The part of me that was still awake enough to know things knew exactly whose shoulder this was. The part of me that should have moved, that should have jerked upright and said sorry and created immediate professional distance, should have activated and did not, could not. The warmth was too real and the rest of me was too far under, and Reeve Caldwell's shoulder was not moving, was not shifting, was making no sound and producing no movement that would have served as excuse or cover for remaining asleep. She was sitting perfectly still. I fell the rest of the way under. The first stop on the route back to the hotel was the drop-off for the technical staff van at the equipment yard. I did not feel the bus stop. The second stop was the residential hotel where 3 players on minor contracts were housed separately. I did not feel that one either. I found out later, from Priya, who had been sitting 2 rows back with one eye open because Priya missed very little, that Reeve had tracked each stop on her phone, that she had glanced at the screen, calculated the approach time, and then looked at the top of my head, and then looked at the screen again, and chosen nothing. 6 stops, 22 minutes, past the point where anyone could have called it an accident. What woke me was the bus slowing for the 7th stop. A traffic signal, actually, not a stop at all. Just the particular lurch of a large vehicle responding to a yellow light. My head lifted slightly and I was awake, fully, the way you are sometimes awake, immediately and completely, with no transition period. I was on Reeve Caldwell's shoulder. I stayed very still for approximately 3 seconds. The kind of 3 seconds where the body understands the situation faster than the mind does, and the body's conclusion, stay, stay, do not move, had already been reached before I had finished registering where I was. I moved. I straightened slowly, which was the most dignified version of what I had available. I pulled myself upright and forward, oriented toward the dark window, and I did not look at her. I heard her breathing, even, controlled. The breathing of a woman who had been sitting with my head on her shoulder for 22 minutes and had apparently not altered her physiological pattern in any perceptible way, which was a discipline so extreme I could not decide whether to admire it or be destabilized by it. I was sorry, I said. My voice was lower than I intended. The bus was quiet around us and I had not meant to speak at all. She said, "Don't be." 2 words. Level. Not coaching me, not managing me, not performing a professional response. 2 words that landed in the space between us like an opened door. I stared at the window. The bus pulled into the hotel lot at 12:42. The team disembarked with the low energy efficiency of people who have won and are tired and want their rooms. I was 3 steps from the door when Priya appeared at my elbow. She said nothing. She handed me a bottle of water, which I had not asked for and did not need, and she looked at me once with the specific expression of a woman who has context and is choosing not to deploy it. "I'll see you at morning practice," she said. "Yeah," I said. I went to my room and did not sleep again until 4. Morning practice was at 9. I arrived at 8:50 with my tape already done and my shoes already tied, and the particular controlled blankness I had developed for situations where I needed my face to do nothing informative. The facility was cold. The overhead lights in the gym were the honest kind. No flattery, no shadow. I was shooting early morning threes when Reeve came in at 8:55. She was in practice clothes, dark track pants, a long sleeve in charcoal, her hair pushed back with the athletic band she wore when the work started. She had a clipboard she was looking at as she came through the door, and she did not look up immediately. When she did, she looked at me. Not at the ball, not at the basket, not at the court. At me. For a fraction of a second, less than a full second, more than the glance she would give anyone else, and then she walked toward the whiteboard. "Good morning, Avila." "Good morning, coach." Her handwriting on the whiteboard was the same as always, clear, efficient, every letter formed fully. Today's drills, today's focus, the season's current problem, which was our third unit communication on pick and roll coverage, which she had been attacking for 2 weeks with the patient, repeating intensity she brought to every recurring problem. The rest of the team filtered in over the next 10 minutes. Priya, who was always on time. Demi Okafor, who was 22 and the most talented young player on the roster, and who arrived at 8:59 every morning, exactly 1 minute before she was required to, with the cheerful conscientiousness of someone who had decided punctuality was a personality trait. 3 other starters. The second unit. The rookies. Reeve ran practice. That was all she did. For 2.5 hours. She was precise. She was demanding. She stopped a pick and roll drill twice because the communication was wrong and started it from the beginning both times without raising her voice or performing frustration, which was its own kind of intimidating. She corrected my defensive footwork once and Demi's hand positioning twice, and a miscommunication in the second unit 4 times. She was exactly the coach she always was, but her eyes, when they landed on me, and they landed on me in the way they had always landed on me, with that complete cataloging attention, stayed a half-second longer than the coaching required. I was aware of every half-second. After practice, when the team was breaking down toward the showers, she said, "Avila, stay a minute." The room shifted around me in the way rooms shift when they become smaller. I stayed. Demi looked at me as she passed with the innocent curiosity of a 22-year-old who does not yet know what she is seeing, and Priya looked at me with the knowing patience of a 34-year-old who absolutely does and is choosing silence. Reeve waited until the room was empty. Then she sat down on the bench along the near wall and set her clipboard on her knee and looked at me across the empty gym. Her voice, when she spoke, was the quiet register. Not a whisper. The register just below professional. "Last night," she said. "I want to address it." I said nothing. I was standing 6 feet from her with my hands at my sides, and I was carrying the thing I was always carrying plus the weight of 22 minutes on a charter bus, and I had decided not to speak until I knew which direction this was going. "You fell asleep," she said. "It happens on long drives." It was not a problem. "It was 6 extra stops," I said. A pause. The gym hummed. The ventilation system and the faraway noise of the training room and the quiet of a large building settling into mid-morning. "You were asleep," she said. "You were not," I said. Another pause. Longer. The kind of pause she used when she was deciding between the honest answer and the professional one. I had learned that pause. I had cataloged the exact duration of it. The professional answer came faster. This one was taking longer. No, she said. I was not. I looked at her. She looked at me. In the honest light of the practice gym, without the bus darkness or the post-game noise, the thing between us was visible in a way that had nothing to do with what either of us had said. I could have woken you, she said. But you didn't, I said. No, she said. I needed to know if that was a decision, I said. She looked at the clipboard on her knee. Then she looked back at me. Yes, she said. The gym was very quiet. I said, okay, she said. It can't be anything else. Right now. I want to be clear about what I'm saying. It was a decision, and it was mine to make in that moment, and it cannot be a pattern. I said, I understand. She said, I'm not sure you do. I said, you chose to let me sleep on your shoulder for 22 minutes, and then you told me it can't be a pattern. I understand what that means. She looked at me again. Something in her jaw worked once, the tell I had been cataloging for 3 months. The smallest possible registration of something she was not going to say out loud in this building on this morning. I won't put you in a position again, she said, where that's possible. I said, what if I would like you to? The quiet after that sentence had weight in it. The kind of weight that fills a space without needing to be named. She said, Avila. I said, I know. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. She said, no. She said it quickly enough that it surprised me. It was honest. Inappropriate is different from honest. I stared at her. She stood. She picked up the clipboard. She was 3 feet from me and the gym was empty, and the light was doing nothing kind or unkind. It was just light. The flat morning kind that makes everything the exact thing it is. She said, I'll see you at film tomorrow. She walked past me toward the coach's hallway. Her shoulder did not brush mine. She left 2 inches of clear space with the precision of a woman who had measured the inches and found that 2 was the minimum survivable distance and was committed to maintaining it. I stood in the empty gym and thought about the word yes, about the way she had said it when I asked whether not waking me had been a decision. 1 syllable, fully certain, completely unguarded for the single beat it took to say it. I thought about that 1 syllable for the rest of the day. The next 3 weeks were the particular kind of professional difficulty that looks, from the outside, like a functioning workplace and feels, from the inside, like learning to breathe inside a room that has gotten smaller without changing its dimensions. Reeve did what she had said she would do. She did not create conditions where the bus moment could repeat. She was my coach at every practice, at every film session, in every hallway conversation about defensive rotations and ball screen coverage, and the third unit's ongoing communication failure. She was precise and demanding and completely present in the coaching role. She did not sit beside me on travel days. She did not, for 3 weeks, stay in any room alone with me for longer than the 30 seconds required to convey a technical correction. And I was aware of every single absence the way you are aware of the removed tooth, the altered texture, the space where the pressure used to be. Demi noticed first, which I should not have been surprised by, because Demi noticed everything and had the particular quality of young talent that processes the world quickly and says the processing aloud before understanding the consequence. She came to my locker one afternoon after practice and sat on the floor with her water bottle between her knees and said, "Is it weird between you and Coach right now?" I said, "What makes you ask that?" She tilted her head. "Before the Sacramento trip, she used to review your film cuts directly with you during team session. Now she sends them through Ang. Ang was our video coordinator. A perfectly competent route for film distribution that meant nothing and meant everything." "She's reorganizing workflows," I said. Demi said, "Okay." She said it with the polite, patient disbelief of a 22-year-old who is being generous. Priya came to me 2 days later. She did not come to my locker or stop me in a hallway. She waited until we were both in the training room after practice, side by side on the treatment tables, and she spoke to the ceiling. "You need to be careful," she said. "I know," I said. "Not for the reasons you think I mean," she said. "She's doing the right thing. She's managing it correctly. That means it's going to sit exactly the way it's sitting for as long as you're both here, unless one of you does something about it or something does it for you." I looked at the ceiling. "Has she always been like this?" I asked. Priya was quiet for a moment. The treatment room hummed around us. The low electrical hum of therapeutic equipment. The distant sound of someone working through a drill in the adjacent space. "She's always been private," she said. "She's always been someone who carries things without asking anyone to carry them for her. I have played for her for 5 years, and I know 2 personal facts about her, and both of them she told me for professional reasons. What's happening with you is different. That's not something I've seen from her before." I said. "That's not helpful." "I know," Priya said. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I'm going to tell you something that is also not helpful, which is that in 5 years I have never watched Reeve Caldwell make a coaching decision that she did not have full professional justification for. Every substitution, every lineup, every tactical shift, goal. She is thorough in a way that makes other coaches look approximate. The fact that she sat on a bus for 22 minutes past any reasonable professional justification and then told you it was a decision when you asked is the most revealing thing I have ever seen from her, and I do not think she does not know that." I said nothing. Priya said, "That's also not helpful." "No," I said. "But it's true," she said. "Yeah," I said, "it is." The game in Phoenix on a Thursday night was the first time in 3 weeks that Reeves' professional discipline showed something at the edge. We had been playing well. The third unit's communication problem had resolved itself 2 games ago, and the defensive rotations were the best they had been all season, and I had been playing the most efficient basketball of my professional career, which I attributed in equal measure to the coaching I was receiving and the specific motivating irritation of knowing exactly what I was not allowed to want. Phoenix's starting shooting guard was a woman named Carmichael, 6 feet, long, quick off the catch. With a step-back three, I had spent 40 minutes in the film room studying because Reeve had shown me the film and said, "That is going to be the difference in this game." And I had said, "I know how to guard it." And she had said, "Show me." I had shown her. Through 3 quarters of Phoenix basketball, I shut Carmichael's step back down, contested it twice, forced 2 turnovers, and allowed her exactly one mid-range look that she missed because she was uncomfortable with how quick I was closing out. It was the best individual defensive performance of my season. In the third quarter, Phoenix tried something different. Their point guard found Carmichael on the short roll instead of the pop, and I transitioned into the coverage a half step slower than I needed to, which was all Carmichael needed to hit a floater over my outstretched hand. The basket was real. The coverage error was real. In the context of the game, it was a minor adjustment. I looked at the bench on the way to the other end of the floor. Reeves' eyes were already on me, not angry, assessing. She raised 2 fingers, the signal for the shell coverage we had been running, and I nodded and ran the next play. We won by 7. Carmichael finished with 11 points, which was a full 15 under her season average, which was the box score version of the story, and missed the point the way box scores often do. In the locker room after media, Reeve came through for the post-game walkthrough. She stopped at my stall last, which was not unusual, and which I had cataloged as not unusual because she moved through rooms with intention, and the order in which she covered them was never arbitrary. She said, "The short roll adjustment in the third." I said, "Half step slow." She said, "Yes." "What corrects it?" I said, "Reading the point guard's shoulder earlier." She telegraphs it. She said, "Yes." She looked at me for one beat past the professional duration. "Your reads tonight were exceptional." I said, "Thank you." She said, "I know." It was such a specific thing to say in response to thank you. I know was not coaching. I know was not professional feedback. I know was the sound of someone receiving a sentence directly instead of processing it through the institutional filter. Someone who had decided in a tired locker room in Phoenix after a 7-point win that managing every syllable was costing more than one of them could afford. She moved on. I sat with it. The flight back was commercial. We flew as a team, but on a booked block of seats on a regular commercial flight, which happened on shorter trips when the charter cost was not justified. The seats were a mixed arrangement. I was in 14C. Priya was in 14A. The seat between us was 14B. Reeve came through the boarding group at the last minute. She was in the charcoal suit from the game, jacket folded over her arm, carry-on stowed efficiently overhead. She looked at the seat numbers once. She sat down in 22A, 4 rows back, beside our assistant coach Renata, who was reviewing notes for a personnel meeting the following week. I watched her settle. I watched her not look forward. Priya, beside me, said nothing. At 35,000 feet, somewhere over the desert, the cabin went into its nighttime dimness. I had my earbuds in. I was not asleep. I was aware of every row between 14C and 22A with the particular, involuntary precision of a body that has been trained to catalog one specific person and is not allowed to stop. 2 hours into the flight, I went to the bathroom at the rear of the plane. On the way back, I had to pass row 22. Reeve was awake. Her seat was slightly reclined, her eyes forward, and she was looking at nothing specific. The particular, unfocused gaze of someone whose mind is operating independently of their visual field. She registered my movement. She looked at me. I looked back. I kept walking. I sat in 14C. I put my earbuds back in and watched the dark out the window and did not sleep for the remainder of the flight. It was Demi, 2 days later, who broke things open. Not intentionally. Demi did nothing intentionally that did not involve basketball. She was the kind of person whose interpersonal impact was almost always accidental, the product of a naturally unguarded honesty that had not yet learned to read the room. We were in the training room, post-practice. Demi, Priya, 2 members of the second unit, and the assistant trainer. The kind of relaxed aftermath where conversation is ambient and unfocused. Demi said, "Did you guys know Coach Caldwell was a 2-time all-conference shooting guard?" We all knew. Priya did not look up from the foam roller. I was looking at the training table ceiling. Demi said, "I was watching old game film of her last night. Like, for fun." She was incredible. Priya said, "She was." Demi said, "She had this pull-up from the left elbow. Exactly like Avila's. It's almost identical." The room was quiet. Priya still did not look up from the foam roller. Demi, apparently unaware of anything, said, "Do you think that's why she recruited you? Because you play like she did?" I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "Maybe." Demi said, "That's kind of a lot, right? Like, you're her in a younger version. That's a lot for a coach to navigate." Priya finally looked up. She looked at Demi with the patient expression of a 34-year-old who is choosing grace over correction. "Demi," she said, "go ice your hip." Demi went. She was still cheerful. She had said the most clarifying thing anyone had said in 3 weeks, and she had absolutely no idea. I lay on the training table and thought about the left elbow pull-up. I had developed it in my second professional year, worked it into a signature. I had run it 100 times this season under Reeve's coaching, and she had corrected the footwork once, and the follow-through angle once, and had never said a word about what it reminded her of. I found the film that night in my room. Old league footage, Reeve Caldwell at 27. in a different organization, in a game I recognized from the playoff year she had mentioned exactly once in a film session as a reference point for fourth quarter execution under pressure. She was standing at the left elbow. She pulled up. She had the same footwork I had developed independently, the same shoulder alignment, the same follow-through. I watched it 4 times. Then I called Priya. Priya picked up on the second ring. She said, "I know what you're going to say." I said, "She recruited me because I play like she played." Priya was quiet for a moment. She said, "I don't think that's why. I think that's a factor. I think it made you familiar to her in a specific way when she was evaluating your film, and I think that was one door in." "But I don't think that's why," I said. "Then why?" Priya said, "Because you are also Tess Avila, who is entirely your own person, and who Reeve Caldwell has been watching play basketball for 3 months with a level of attention that has nothing to do with your shooting form." I said nothing for a long time. Priya said, "I'm going to tell you something, and then I am going to hang up and not discuss it again unless you bring it up. When you were asleep on that bus, she didn't look at her phone for most of it. Ang was sitting 1 row ahead and she saw. She told me." Reeve sat there and looked at the window with her shoulder perfectly still, and she looked like the most deliberate person who had ever made a choice to keep someone asleep. The line was quiet. Priya said, "Good night, Tess." She hung up. I sat in the hotel room and thought about deliberate, about the difference between someone who doesn't notice you've fallen asleep and someone who makes the choice to let you keep sleeping. About what it costs a woman like Reeve Caldwell to make any choice that is not entirely defensible in professional terms. About Stop 7. About what she was thinking on Stop 7. The following week had a home stretch. 4 games in 8 days, which was the kind of schedule that absorbed everything and left no room for the complicated interior work of being in close proximity to someone you could not name. I was grateful for it. I played well. I played with the particular motivated precision of a person who is channeling something into their work that has nowhere else to go. Reeve watched from the coaching box. She was always watching from the coaching box. She was always watching me specifically in the way that she was always watching every player specifically, except it had never felt like this with any other coach. It had never felt like something she was working around rather than through. Game 3 of the home stretch was the Tuesday night game against the first-place team in the East. National broadcast. A sellout. The kind of game that mattered for seeding and for the specific psychological record that playoff teams compile. The evidence that they can beat the best when the best shows up. We won. I had 24 points and the best defensive game of my season, which by this point was becoming a pattern that the broadcast had stopped treating as a surprise and started treating as a story. In the post-game presser, 2 reporters asked about my defensive evolution, and I gave them the honest answer, which was that I had better coaching this season than I had previously in my career, and the follow-up question was about Caldwell's system, and I talked about the system and not about the person, which was the only version of the truth that was mine to share. After the presser, after the locker room settled, after most of the team had gone to the late-night dinner that was the organization's tradition after home wins, I was still at my locker. Priya was across the room, taking her time with her recovery work. The training staff was breaking things down. The room was not empty, but it was close to it. Reeve came in. She had changed out of the game day suit. She was in dark slacks and a simple shirt, her jacket over her arm. She was doing the walkthrough she always did, checking in with the training staff, covering the logistics of the next travel day. She reached my stall last. She said, 24 points and your career best defensive game on a national broadcast. I said, I had good preparation. She looked at me. The noise of the room was ambient and genuine and provided a useful cover for the specific quality of the silence between us. The silence that existed inside the sound, rather than instead of it. She said, I've been thinking about what you said in the gym. I said, I said several things in the gym. She said, the specific thing. What if I would like you to? I held her gaze. She said, I shouldn't have said I know in the locker room in Phoenix. That wasn't coaching. I said, I know, she said, and I shouldn't be having this conversation here. I said, where should we be having it? A pause. The training staff moved in the background with the disciplined invisibility of people who were very good at not hearing conversations they were not supposed to be part of. She said, nowhere that I can justify professionally. I said, Reeve. She looked at me. It was the first time I had used her first name in a context that was not someone else using it and me repeating it. It was the first time it had come out of my mouth with the full weight it had in my head, without the professional buffer of coach between us. She did not correct me. Avila, she said. I said, I know what you're managing. I've been watching you manage it for 3 months. I'm not asking you to stop managing it. I'm asking you to tell me what you're managing. She looked at the door, then at the room, then at me. She said, I'm managing the fact that I have not been objective about you since before this season started. That I watched your film in the evaluation process and made a decision that was partially professional and partially something I was not ready to call by its name. That every coaching decision I have made regarding your development has been real coaching and also has been informed by the fact that I find you. She stopped. I waited. The room held its breath. The training staff did not move. She said, that I find you the most specific person I have been in proximity to in a very long time, and that I am aware of this, and I am managing it because it is my job to manage it, and because you deserve a coach who is only your coach, and I am not certain I am capable of being only that anymore. The room was very close around us. I said, that is the most honest thing you have said to me. She said, I know. I should not have said it here. I said, I'm glad you did. She said, Tess. My name. Not Avila. Tess. The lockers and the training tables and the ambient sound of a winning locker room settling into evening. All of it continued around us, and we stood 6 inches apart, and she said my name, like she had been keeping it somewhere specific, and had finally, in this room, with these witnesses and these consequences, let it out. I said, I'll see you at practice. She said, yes. I turned and went. I walked out of the locker room and into the hallway and stood against the concrete wall for a full minute with my hands flat against the cool surface, pressing the texture of it into my palms while I waited for my breathing to level. 6 stops, 22 minutes. And now I was the most specific person she had been in proximity to in a very long time, and I was standing in a hallway with my hands pressed against concrete, and she was inside with her jacket over her arm, and her composure holding by threads that I could see fraying from the inside, even if nobody else could. I did not have the answer yet for what came next. I did not know what she was going to do with the honesty she had just given me, or what I was going to do with the way my name had sounded in her mouth. But I had her voice saying Tess, not Avila, not the professional distance of a surname, Tess. And that was the most dangerous thing I had ever been given to carry. And I was already very tired of putting things down. I slept that night. That surprised me. I lay down at 11:30 expecting the ceiling and the churning review of everything she had said, the specific loop of a mind that has received something it does not know how to file, and instead I was asleep by midnight and did not move until 6. I have thought about this since, about what it means that my body relaxed after the locker room instead of before it. About the particular quality of exhaustion that follows the end of a long pretending, not the exhaustion of having done something wrong, but the exhaustion of having held something carefully in both hands for months without anyone seeing it, and finally setting it down. She had said Tess. I had slept. Practice at 9 was the same practice it always was. This was one of the things I had come to depend on about Reeve, the consistency of the environment she created. The whiteboard looked the same. The drills had the same architecture. The cold of the facility was the same cold. She ran us through transition reads, and then through ball screen coverage, and then through a 30-minute scrimmage at three-quarter pace that was specifically designed to stress the third unit's communication in game-like conditions. She corrected me once. My plant foot on a crossover drive was landing too square, which opened the angle for a steal if the defender was in the right position. She said it plainly, from the edge of the court, and I adjusted, and she moved on. It was nothing. It was completely normal coaching. And underneath the complete normality of it was the fact that she had said my name last night, and she was standing on the edge of that court now with her clipboard and her professional composure, and the two of us were the only people in the building who knew the distance between those two things. Demi ran the scrimmage with the relentless enthusiasm of a person whose body has not yet learned to be tired, which was one of her most valuable qualities and one of the most exhausting things about practicing alongside her. She was good. Genuinely, specifically good, the kind of good that had been obvious since training camp, and that Reeve coached with the particular investment she brought to talent she believed in. After scrimmage, Demi landed beside me during the water break, with the specific alertness of someone who has decided to ask a question. "Are you okay?" she said. I said, "I'm fine." She said, "You look like you're thinking very hard about something that isn't basketball." I said, "I'm thinking about my plant foot." Demi said, "Okay, but also your face looks different than it looked yesterday." I looked at her. She looked back with the patient, genuinely curious attention of a 22-year-old who had not yet learned that some observations were better left unspoken, and who would eventually be an excellent teammate for exactly this reason, and a complicated one for exactly the same reason. "Different how?" I said. She thought about it. "Like you put something down?" she said. "I don't know. Different." Priya, on the other side of me, drank her water and did not look at either of us. After practice, after the showers, after the training staff had finished, and the facility had gone to its midday quiet, I was still at my locker when I heard Reeve in the coach's hallway. Not words, just movement, the sound of her office door, the particular cadence of someone working through something on their own time. I had learned the rhythm of this building the way you learn any place you spend enough hours. The machinery cycles, the ventilation changes, the specific acoustics of different hallways at different times of day. I picked up my bag and went home. The week that followed had the quality of a held breath. Not strained, the practices were good, the games were good. We won 2 and lost 1. And the loss was the kind that clarified rather than damaged because it exposed a specific rotation problem that Reeve identified and corrected inside 48 hours with a film session that was one of the best I had attended. She was excellent at her job. She was excellent at her job in the way that people are excellent at the thing they love most, with a completeness that went past professional competence into something closer to vocation. That was the week the journalist appeared. Her name was Suki Rains. She covered the league for a national outlet and was in town for a 3-game stretch to write a feature on our season, specifically on the defensive evolution story, which had become one of the more discussed developments in the league by mid-November. The feature was not about me specifically, but I was the subject of one section of it, and Suki requested a sit-down interview that the communications staff scheduled on a Wednesday morning between the shoot-around and lunch. She was direct and prepared, the kind of journalist who had done the film homework before she showed up and asked questions that required more than talking points. She was also perceptive in the particular way of people who have spent years watching other people talk about things they're trying not to say. The interview went 40 minutes. We talked about the defensive system, about the adjustment from my previous organization's philosophy to Reeves, about the specific technical changes in my positioning and read anticipation. She asked smart questions and I gave her real answers, which was the only kind I knew how to give. At the 35-minute mark, she looked at her notes and then looked at me. "What's the thing about Caldwell's coaching that you couldn't have gotten anywhere else?" she asked. I thought about the question for a moment. Not performing the thought, actually thinking, because it was a question that deserved a real answer. "She teaches you to trust your own reads," I said. "Most coaches build systems and then teach you to run the system. Reeve builds the system around the reads you already know how to make, and then teaches you to make them faster and better. The system grows from you instead of you being fitted into the system." Suki wrote something down. "And you feel like that approach has been specifically responsive to you?" I said. "She's a precise coach. She's precise about everyone." Suki looked up. "That's not what I asked." I looked at her. She said, "The film on you this season is the best defensive basketball I've watched from a two-guard in 3 years. The numbers support it. The eye test supports it. And every person I've talked to in and around this organization says the same thing, that Caldwell's relationship with your development is qualitatively different from her relationship with any other player's development. I'm not asking you to confirm or deny anything personal. I'm asking, do you feel that precision?" I said, "Yes." She said, "What does that feel like?" I said, "Like someone is paying complete attention." She wrote it down. Then she looked up again and said, "Thank you." And the interview moved on. It was the most precise description of Reeve I had ever offered out loud, and I had offered it to a national journalist, and I sat in my car afterward and thought about whether that was a mistake, and decided it was not, because it was also completely true and completely professional, and completely the kind of thing a player says about excellent coaching. But I also thought about the way Suki Raines had looked at me when she said she wasn't asking me to confirm or deny anything personal. She knew. Not with certainty, not with anything she could print. But she was the kind of perceptive, film-literate journalist who covered professional sports and had sat in on one of our practices, and she could see the shape of things even from the outside. The feature ran the following Thursday. It was accurate and well-written, and the section about my defensive development was generous and specific, and it quoted the complete attention line exactly. I read it at 7 in the morning over coffee, and was still reading it when my phone buzzed. Priya's text said, "Have you read it?" I texted back, "Yes." Her next text said, "Does she know you read it?" I set my phone down and thought about that. Practice was at 10. I arrived at 9:40 and the facility was already busy. The feature had run with enough visibility that our communications director was handling calls before the team had convened. And there was a specific quality to the morning that existed when outside attention landed on a building and the people inside had to decide how to carry it. Reeve was at the whiteboard when I came in. She looked up when the door opened, the way she always did. The immediate scan, the registration of who had arrived and what their physical state was. The near instantaneous coaching assessment that was so habitual in her, it had become part of her resting expression. She looked at me for one beat longer than the assessment required. "Good feature," she said. The complete attention line was accurate. I said I was telling the truth. She said, "I know." That was all. She turned back to the whiteboard. The team filed in. Practice happened. It was a good practice. Sharp. Focused. The kind that exists when a team has momentum and knows it and is willing to do the work required to keep it. But something in the building had shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would register to anyone who had not been watching closely. The feature had named, in the most oblique and professional language, the thing that everyone in the building had been pretending not to see, and the pretending was getting harder. It was Renata who came to me first. Renata Osei was our assistant coach. 42, patient, one of the most organizationally intelligent people I had ever encountered in a professional context. She had been with this organization for 3 years, had been an assistant under Reeves' predecessor before that, and she possessed the particular loyalty of a person who had decided, through experience and observation, that Reeve Caldwell was worth protecting even when protecting her was complicated. She found me in the equipment room on a Thursday afternoon, which was a specific choice. The equipment room at that hour was always empty, and always loud enough with its own machinery to absorb a private conversation. She said, "I'm going to say something once, and not bring it up again." I said, "Okay." She said, "You are a good player and you are going to be fine regardless of how this season ends. I need you to know that first so you can hear the second thing." I waited. She said, "Reeve has been coaching at the professional level for 6 years. She has never had a conflict of interest she was not in full control of. This is the first time I have watched her manage something she was losing control of by increments. And I am telling you that because I think you already know it, and because I think knowing that she knows it is important context for whatever happens next." I said, "What do you think happens next?" She looked at me with the careful, honest patience of a woman who had been in this industry long enough to have seen every version of this story. "I think," she said, "that she is going to do something correctly that is going to cost her something real. And I think she has known it was coming since before the bus." She left. The equipment room hummed around me. I stood there for a moment and thought about the word correctly. It was the Phoenix rematch, the home game, nationally televised again, late in November, where the breaking point arrived. Not dramatically, not in the way that sports movies stage their breaking points, with confrontations in bright light and audiences and clear moral architecture. It arrived the way real breaking points arrive, quietly and badly timed, during a television timeout in the third quarter with the score tied and 40 people doing their jobs on the floor around us. A journalist from the broadcast had positioned himself near the sideline during the timeout. He was doing what sideline journalists do, gathering the ambient material of the coaching box for the color segment that would run in the fourth quarter. He was close enough to catch the whiteboard if the camera angle worked, which was standard and unremarkable. He was also close enough to catch me returning to the bench from the floor, which was also standard. And he said something. I did not catch all of it. Only the word remarkable and your game and something about the defensive efficiency number that had been running in the broadcast graphics. And I looked at him and smiled the automatic smile of a professional athlete handling broadcast attention at a bad moment and turned toward the bench. Reeve was watching. Not the board, not the floor. She was watching me and the sideline journalist and the distance between us, which was approximately 3 feet, and entirely professional and entirely innocent, and which her eyes had categorized in a way that I recognized from the tunnel before Game 1 of the previous series. From Felix Strand, from the look that had started all of this for a different player in a different story. I recognized it because I had been cataloging her for months. The timeout ended. I went back onto the floor. We won. I scored 22 and held Phoenix's primary scorer under her average for the second time in 2 weeks, and the broadcast segment in the fourth quarter was everything the sideline journalist had been positioning for. Flattering and accurate and professionally unremarkable in every way. In the post-game, during the locker room walkthrough, Reeve came to my stall. The room was still full. Teammates, training staff, the normal post-win noise. She said, "You came off the pick and roll too early in the second. The gap was there if you stay." I looked at her. It was a real correction. The gap had been real. I had left it a beat early, which was a small error in a game I had otherwise played cleanly. I said, "I know. I saw it." She said, "The broadcast segment." She said it quietly. Not quiet enough. I looked at her. She said, "Keep your focus on the game during timeouts." I said nothing. I held her gaze. The locker room moved around us. Two of my teammates were pretending very hard to be interested in the ceiling. "He was talking to me about my defensive rating," I said, just as quietly. She said, "I know what he was talking about." And there it was. The moment that was not about the game, and both of us knew it. And the locker room knew it, and the particular silence that opened up around us was the kind that meant everyone within earshot was very suddenly very involved in something other than us. I said, "Coach." She said nothing. Her jaw was set. The control was entirely visible as an effort. I said, "We should not be having this conversation here." A long pause. "You're right," she said. "Good game, Avila." She moved on. She finished the walkthrough with the professional completeness she brought to everything, and she left the locker room without looking at me again. Priya waited until the room had thinned before she came and sat beside me. She did not say anything for a while. She sat with her hands between her knees and looked at the floor. Then she said, "She knows." I said, "She knows what?" Priya said, "She knows what she just did. She knows exactly what it looked like. She's not going to let herself do it again." I said, "She just told me to keep my focus on the game because a broadcast journalist complimented my defensive rating." Priya said, "I know." I said, "In front of the locker room." Priya said, "I know." I said, "Priya." She looked at me. I said, "I need you to tell me what you actually think. Not the version where you're managing both of us. The real one." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think she is the most controlled person I have ever played for, and I think she is losing ground, and I think she knows it, and I think that knowledge is going to make her do the right thing, in a way that is going to hurt both of you for a while." I said, "The right thing being?" Priya said, "The thing that takes her out of the position to keep doing this to you." I sat with that for a long time. She was in my hallway the next morning. Not early. It was 8:15, which was not the building's off hours. She had come to the facility before the team arrived, which was her normal schedule, but she was not in the coach's hall and she was not at the whiteboard. She was standing outside the entrance to the players' corridor, in the charcoal suit she wore for administrative days, her jacket fully on, her hands in front of her holding nothing. She saw me. She did not move toward me, and she did not move away. I said, "You're early." She said, "So are you." A pause. The facility hummed. The early morning sound of a large building that was not yet fully inhabited. She said, "I need to tell you something before the team comes in." I said, "Okay." She said, "What happened last night in the locker room was wrong." I said something under cover of a professional correction that had nothing to do with the professional correction. I used a coaching context to say something personal, and I did it in front of your teammates. And that was not something I had the right to do. I said, "I know." She said, "I have a meeting with the general manager at 10 o'clock this morning. I'm going to disclose a conflict of interest that I should have disclosed before now. I'm going to do this, regardless of what the organization decides to do with that disclosure. And I'm doing it because what I said to you last night made it clear to me that I have been allowing this to affect my coaching decisions in ways I have not been managing appropriately." I stared at her. She said, "I want you to hear it from me before anyone else says anything. You did nothing wrong. The performance review that follows will be about my judgment, not your conduct." I said, "Reeve." She looked at me. I said, "You don't have to lose the job." She said, "I'm not planning to lose the job. I'm planning to do what I should have done 2 months ago, which is report it correctly and comply with whatever process the organization determines is appropriate. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm not going to keep using the coaching box to say things I don't have the right to say." I said, "The locker room. Last night." She said, "Was the version of this that I am not willing to do again." I said, It was the first time you've done it that way. She said, I know. That's why it has to be the last. She was very still. The suit was immaculate, and the composure was immaculate, and underneath both of them was the particular quality of a decision that had been made at significant cost and was not going to be unmade. I said, What do you want from me? She said, Nothing. I want you to play basketball. I want you to finish this season the way you've been playing it, which is the best basketball of your career, and I want you to know that what I'm doing at 10 o'clock today is not your responsibility and is not the consequence of anything you did wrong. I said, I know whose responsibility it is. She looked at me for a long moment. Something in her face did the thing it sometimes did, the composure not failing but becoming transparent, showing what was underneath it the way a window shows what is on the other side without disappearing itself. She said, Good game last night, Avila. And this time, when she said it, it was only what it was. No cover story, no secondary meaning wrapped inside a professional phrase, just the clean, honest truth of a coach who had watched a player do her job well and was naming it. I said, Thank you. She nodded. She walked toward the coach's hall. I stood in the corridor and watched her go and thought about the word appropriate, about the specific form of love that chooses the right thing, not because the right thing is easy, but because anything else costs the other person something they should not have to pay. The 10 o'clock meeting lasted 40 minutes. I know because Renata texted Priya, and Priya texted me at 10:52. One word, done. The general manager was a woman named Dorinda Vance, who had been in professional basketball for 22 years and who had, in those 22 years, handled more personnel situations than most GMs see in a career. She was not a warm woman. She was a thorough one. She was the kind of person who, when presented with an honest disclosure from a staff member, processed it with the same methodical even-handedness she brought to every personnel decision, and who had enough experience to distinguish between a coach who was trying to manage a situation and a coach who was disclosing because she had decided the honest accounting was the right one. She called me in at 2 o'clock. I went. Her office was on the administrative floor, one level above the coaches. It had a window that faced the practice facility below, which I had always thought was a specific and deliberate architectural choice. She said, Reeve Caldwell spoke to me this morning about a conflict of interest she identified in her coaching relationship with you. I said, I know. She said, the organization takes these disclosures seriously. There will be a review period. During that review period, Reeve will not have game day coaching duties. She will remain available to the organization in an advisory capacity and will continue in her facility role. I said, How long? She said, 30 days, pending review outcome. I said, She disclosed this voluntarily. Dorinda said, Yes. I said, That matters. Dorinda looked at me with the patient attention of a woman who had seen 22 years of people telling her the things that mattered. She said, It matters to me that she disclosed it honestly and without negotiating the terms. It will be part of the review. I am not going to discuss the review's likely outcome with you. I said, Understood. I left. Practice the next morning was run by Renata, who was excellent and efficient, and had clearly been briefed and had equally clearly decided that the most useful thing she could do for this team in a disruptive moment was to run practice in a way that felt like continuity. The drills were Reeve's drills. The defensive read progressions were the ones Reeve had installed in September. The film session that followed was run from Reeve's notes, which Renata had reviewed, and which she delivered with the particular competence of someone who understood a system deeply enough to teach it without having built it. The team was not unsettled. That was the thing that struck me most. We had been good this season because of what Reeve had built, and what Reeve had built was real and operational, and did not require her daily presence to function. She had built something that could outlast her absence, which was, I thought, the most honest evidence of what kind of coach she was. I played the next game the way I had been playing all season. The game after that, too. Priya, after the second game, sat with me on the team bus. The same charter bus, the same route, the same low lighting, and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "You're playing the best basketball of your career without her in the coaching box." I said, "I know." Priya said, "Does that bother you?" I thought about it. Then I said, "No." Because she built it into me before she left the box. The coaching is still there. I'm still running it. Priya was quiet. I said, "That's what I mean about her being good at what she does. She built something that doesn't depend on her being present to function." Priya said, "That's also what she was afraid of. That she might be making you better at basketball and worse at knowing the difference between what she gives you as a coach and what she gives you as a person." I looked at the dark outside the window. I said, "I know the difference." Priya said, "I know you do." We rode in the quiet. The city lights moved past the window. The bus had the particular nighttime warmth of a moving vehicle full of tired people, and the third row on the right side had one empty aisle seat, and I was aware of the empty seat the way I had been aware of every absence since November. The review concluded at day 26, 4 days ahead of the 30-day window. The organization issued a formal reprimand. The terms of the disclosure, voluntary, complete, consistent, were noted in the outcome document, which Dorinda summarized for me in a second meeting I had not requested, but which she had evidently decided I was entitled to. She said, "Reeve returns to full coaching duties as of Monday." I said, "Okay," she said. "The terms of the reprimand include a formal acknowledgement that certain coaching decisions were informed by a conflict of interest and a commitment to utilizing appropriate disclosure processes proactively going forward." I said, "Yes." She said, "She's a good coach, Avila. The organization intends to keep her." I said, "She's the best coach I've played for." Dorinda looked at me with the 22-year patience of someone who knew exactly what that sentence contained. She said, "Good. Play well the rest of the season." Reeve returned on a Monday. She was in the building at 7:15, which I know because I was in the building at 7, which was itself evidence of something I was not going to examine directly. I was in the gym shooting when she came through the side door. She had the clipboard. She had the charcoal suit. She had the watch on her right wrist that I had been cataloging since October. She saw me. She stopped at the edge of the floor. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," I said. She walked to the whiteboard. She uncapped the marker. She wrote today's drills in her clear, economical hand. I kept shooting. After 10 minutes, she said from the whiteboard, without turning, "Your early rotation on the back pick is still landing slightly late." "I watched your tape from the Portland game." I said, "I know. I've been working on it." She said, "Show me." I ran the footwork progression 3 times. She watched from the edge of the floor and did not correct me on the first 2, and then came onto the court for the third, stood beside me, and moved my weight forward on the plant without touching me, just pointing to the angle she wanted, close enough that I could see exactly what she meant. She stepped back. "Try it again," she said. I ran it 4 more times. The 4th time was right. She said, "Yes, 1 word." But in her register, that register, it carried the weight of everything she had spent 30 days not being in the building to say. Practice was as it had always been. She ran us through the season's work with the same precision, the same patience, the same unhurried demand that had characterized every practice since October. She corrected Demi's hand positioning once, and Priya's positioning on a close-out twice, and my early rotation once more, at full speed during scrimmage, in the clean professional language of a coach who was doing her job and doing it well. She was back. She was exactly back. And whatever was still between us, and something was still between us, had always been between us, would not disappear simply because the review had concluded and the reprimand had been issued, was something she was not going to address in this building. I understood that. I had understood it since the morning in the hallway before the 10 o'clock meeting. The disclosure had been the honest accounting, the real step, the thing that could not be undone. The rest of it was going to have to exist somewhere else. We won 8 of the last 12 regular season games. We entered the playoffs as a 3 seed with the best defensive rating in the league, which the analytics community described as the direct consequence of a systemic coaching approach that had taken 2 full seasons to fully implement. Reeve gave 3 press conferences about the defensive philosophy during the playoff run, and was specific and gracious and technically excellent in all of them, and said, in the third one, that the biggest single factor in the defensive evolution was a player who had been willing to trust the reads the system asked for before the results gave her reason to. And the reporter followed up and asked, which player? And she said, Avila. Simply and without elaboration, and moved to the next question. I read the transcript at 11:30 that night in my apartment. I read it twice. We lost in the second round to the top seed by 4 games to 1. They were better, deeper, better rested, with a starting group that had been playing together for 3 years and whose offensive chemistry was the most developed I had faced. We competed in every game. We won 1. I played all 5, averaged 21, made every defensive read that mattered, and 2 that the broadcast described as extraordinary, and that I described to myself as the logical conclusion of a season of coaching I had finally trusted completely. The last game was a road loss. I played 36 minutes. When the buzzer sounded, I stood on the floor for a moment and let the season settle over me. The full shape of it, from October's first practice to this road court in the second round of the playoffs, all of it real and substantial, and worth the cost of every complicated thing it had contained. In the locker room after, Reeve did the walkthrough. She said the things coaches say after a playoff loss that is also a season-defining achievement. Honest, specific, generous in the way that she was only ever generous when the honesty earned it. She told us what this season had built. She did not minimize the loss or the distance between us and the top seed. She told us the truth, which was that we had become one of the best defensive teams in the league in 2 seasons, and that this was not the end of the building but the proof of concept for what came next. She reached my stall last. She always reached my stall last, and by the end of this season, it had stopped being something I cataloged and become something I simply knew the way I knew the order of my pre-game routine. Good season, Avila, she said. I said, good coaching. She looked at me for one beat, one long, fully present beat. Then she said, the early rotation, the plant foot. I said, I know. She said, you had it by Portland. I said, you told me. She said, you did it yourself. I held her gaze. The locker room was moving around us in the particular low-register grief of a season-ending loss that was also a hard-won thing, and she was standing in the middle of it with her clipboard at her side and her eyes on me. She said, I'll see you in October. I said, yes. She walked out. The summer was long, not in a bad way. Long in the way that summers are long when you are rehabbing and training and doing the off-season work that professional athletes do, and allowing the season to process into something you understand from a distance. My left knee needed more attention than I had given it during the season, and I spent 6 weeks with a physio who had opinions about my loading patterns and was right about all of them, and I ran and lifted and worked through the footwork progressions that Reeve had installed in me until they were reflex rather than execution. I thought about her. I was not going to pretend I did not. I thought about her in the way I had thought about her all season. with the specific, involuntary attention of a person whose mind has decided that one particular subject is worth returning to regardless of the hour or the context. I thought about the bus. I thought about the gym, about the word yes said in the flat morning light. I thought about the hallway before the 10 o'clock meeting and the specific form of love that chooses the right thing when the right thing costs something real. I did not call her. I had decided, sometime in June, sitting on the physio's table with my knee elevated and the summer light coming through the window, that whatever happened next was going to have to come from her. Not because I was withholding, not because I was punishing, but because she had done the hard thing in the right way, and the next step in a right way looked like her finding me in the off-season without armor or title or professional reason, and I was going to give her the space to do that, or not do it. I gave her until August. She found me on a Thursday afternoon in the third week of August at a public court 3 blocks from my apartment where I went on non-training days to shoot without structure. It was 4:30. The court was mostly empty. 2 teenagers at the far basket, a woman walking a dog along the perimeter path. The light was the late summer kind, angled and gold, doing useful things to the city. I heard footsteps on the court surface and turned. She was in dark jeans and a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. No jacket, no clipboard. Her hair was down, which I had seen twice before. Once in the hotel in Portland, and once in the gym in the mornings, briefly, and both times it had been significant. Her hands were in her pockets. She stopped 10 feet from me. I had known she would come. I had not known when, and I had not known what she would say first, but I had known in the way you know things that have been building long enough to become inevitable. She said, "I got your address from Priya." I said, "I know." She texted me. A pause. She said, "I should have come sooner." I said, "You came when you were ready to say the right thing. That was the right time." She looked at the basket over my shoulder, then back at me. In the late afternoon light, without the professional frame, she looked different than she looked in the facility. Not less like herself, but more like the version of herself that existed before she had decided what shape to hold. The composure was real, as it was always real, but it was resting now rather than working. She said, "I owe you an apology." I said, "Tell me which one." She said, "The locker room, the correction that was not about your footwork." I said, "Yes." She said, "I used my position to say something I had no right to say in that context, in front of your teammates, in a room where the power in the relationship was not equal. That was wrong. Not the feeling. I am not apologizing for the feeling. I am apologizing for what I did with it." I held the basketball against my hip and looked at her. She said, "And the bus? I should have woken you at the first stop." I said, "No, you shouldn't have." She looked at me. I said, "That's the one thing I don't need you to apologize for." She said, "It started everything that was difficult." I said, "It was also the most honest thing that had happened between us up to that point." She was quiet. The gold light moved on the court surface. She said, "I have been thinking about honesty, about the version of it I was doing all season, managing something honestly instead of being honest about something. They feel similar from the inside, and they're not the same thing." I said, "No." She said, "I managed it because I believed managing it was the better version, that keeping the coaching clean was more important than naming what else was there, and I believe that was right. I still believe the coaching had to be clean. But I convinced myself that managing it was the same as accounting for it, and it wasn't. The locker room was the proof." I said, "What changed?" She said, "You called me by my name." I looked at her. She said, "In the locker room after the national broadcast game, you said Reeve and not coach." And I understood, standing there, that you had been seeing all of it the whole time. Not the version I was presenting, the actual thing. And that I had been asking you to carry the weight of that seeing without giving you anything honest to do with it. The teenagers at the far basket were laughing about something. The dog walker had completed her circuit and was leaving the court. The gold light was getting longer. I said, "I've been carrying it since October." She said, "I know. That's the apology. Not the bus. Not the locker room. The 5 months of asking you to carry something I wouldn't name." I looked at her for a long time. This woman who had given me the best coaching of my professional career, who had built something into me that I would run for the rest of my career, regardless of what happened between us next, who had stood in front of a general manager and disclosed honestly and voluntarily because the honest accounting was the only version she could live inside, who had found a public court on a Thursday afternoon in August and apologized for the 5 months before she said the thing correctly, which was somehow the most precise form of accountability she could have offered. I said, "I accept it." She looked at me. Something in her face shifted the way it had shifted in the gym in October when she said yes. The composure transparent rather than absent, showing what was behind it. I said, "I'm going to ask you something," the same way I asked in the gym. She said, "Okay." I said, "Was the bus a decision?" She said, "The bus was the first honest thing I did." I said, "And the I know, in Phoenix." She said, "That was the second," I said. "And coming here." She said, "That is the third." I walked toward her. 4 steps. The court surface was warm under my shoes from the afternoon sun, and the air smelled like late summer and cut grass from the park that ran along the east side. I stopped when I was close enough that she was not performing distance, not managing the 2 inches, just standing there, in the gold light, in her own actual proximity. I reached up and touched her jaw first. Warm skin, the line of it specific and familiar in the way that things you have studied without touching are familiar, recognized before they are known. Her breath changed. She did not move back. I said, "Tell me the third thing." She said, "I have loved you since before I brought you here. I recognized you in your film before I met you, and I brought you here because your game was honest and I thought I could keep the 2 things separate and I was wrong." I said, "Say the rest of it." She said, "I love you, Tess, not Avila. You." I kissed her. It was not frantic. It did not have the desperation of things kept too long in the dark. It was patient and specific and fully present. The kind of contact that earns itself, that exists at the far end of a long patience, that does not need to be anything except what it is. Her hand settled at my waist. Not a claim. A choice. Fully made, fully conscious. The weight of a decision that had been building since October and had finally arrived somewhere it was allowed to be. We stood on the court in the gold light and it was completely quiet. After a while she said, against my cheek, still close, "Your early rotation on the back pick is better." I said, "You would bring up my rotation." She said, "It's better." I watched the Portland tape. "You fixed it." I said, "I had a good teacher." She said, "You did the work." I said, "We're going to argue about this for a long time." She said, "Yes." I said, "Good." We walked off the court together in the late afternoon. She did not reach for my hand, which I had expected. What she did instead was fall into step beside me with the natural, settled ease of a person who has decided where she is going and is glad to have arrived. Not a performance of togetherness, but the actual thing, unperformed, unhurried. 2 people walking in the same direction because they had decided to. The season started in October. She was in the coaching box. I was in the starting lineup where I had been since she first put me there. We played the way we had always played. She coached, and I ran her system. And the system worked, because we had built it together across a year and a half of honest, complicated, occasionally painful collaboration. Demi, 3 games into the season, came to my locker with the specific expression of someone who has confirmed a theory they had been holding for some time. She said, I was right. I said, about what? She said, that your face looks different now than it looked before. Not like you put something down, like you picked something up. I looked at her. She said, that's good. You should have nice things. She left. Priya, on the bus back from the first road win of the season, sat in the third row on the right side and left the aisle seat empty. She did not look at it. She did not say anything about it. She plugged in her headphones and looked out the window and allowed the seat to exist as what it was, a space that had been significant and was now simply a seat on a charter bus. Ordinary and unmysterious. Just the place where ordinary things happen. Reeve took the seat in the fourth row beside Renata. She had her tablet. She was reviewing something. After 40 minutes, I heard her footsteps in the aisle, the specific sound of her moving through the bus, the economy of it. And she stopped at my row. She reached across Priya's empty aisle seat and set something on the armrest beside my knee, a small bottle of the electrolyte mix I used before games, the specific kind, sourced from a place 12 minutes from the arena. She said, you forgot yours at the facility. I looked at the bottle. I looked at her. In the darkened bus, in the particular light of a vehicle moving through a nighttime city, she was looking at me with the same complete, cataloging attention she had always brought to the subject of me. Not management, not discipline, just the fullest possible attention offered freely, with no professional reason and no cover story. I said, thank you. She said, get some rest. She walked back to the fourth row. I held the bottle and looked at the dark outside the window and felt the specific quality of a good and right thing that does not need to be performed or explained. Just carried, freely and without cost, the whole way home.